So it was one of those things that the adrenaline just lasted 7 days. While we were out there running and gunning, there was no downtime. It was just, hey, let's keep getting after it. Because you figure, especially that type of scenario where we know where the enemy is, it was just a free fall, and it was awesome. Like, everybody was trying to get after it. It's like a SF guy's freaking wet dream. We know where the enemy is. We have all the air support that we could think of. If anything moves, like, they're getting shot. And it was awesome. It was the perfect revenge mission.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we have an in-depth combat story with 20-year veteran and Green Beret Jay Dorleus. Jay spent the initial portion of his career in the regular Army as a combat engineer, including 2 rotations to Iraq, where he conducted route clearing and base patrol operations that included losing some of his best friends to IEDs in a very reactive combat environment. Jay would eventually transition to the Special Forces, where he was in a more proactive posture, taking the fight to the enemy this time around. He fought in some of the more challenging areas of Afghanistan with 3rd Special Forces Group and nearly died on multiple occasions, including a bullet narrowly missing his head, a 16-hour gunfight, and more. His childhood is anything but ordinary as he moved to the U.S. from Haiti with his family and maintained that New York immigrant mindset to help him succeed in the military. He created a YouTube channel now that he's retired to teach aspiring special operators how to successfully pass selection and learn from his mistakes and gain from his strengths. I hope you enjoy this very real and wide-ranging interview with the longtime Green Beret as much as I did. Jay, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us today.
Of course. Not a big deal at all.
You've done quite a bit from your time in uniform, and we'll get into a lot of that. I want to, however, start with something you're working on now with, and make sure I get this right, the Green Beret Chronicles, and helping aspiring SF candidates get into the pipeline.
Yeah, so Green Beret Chronicles came about once I decided to pull the plug on retirement. And I tell this to anybody I ask, like, we literally, at least in my case, I felt like I spent 20 years in jail, right? That's the analogy that I like to use, because staying along that line, you have a convict, he does, all he knows is jail. He gets out. What does he do? He goes out, he conducts another crime, and then he goes right back to jail. It was the same concept with me. It's like, hey, I just spent 20 years in prison. I'm doctrinalized, and now I'm getting ready to, have freedom. Like, what am I going to do next? My identity was the military. And now that I'm getting out, I didn't really have that purpose. I didn't really know what was next for me. So with that in mind, I started Green Beret Chronicles because I noticed that one of the things that I like to do is coach, teach, and mentor. So it's like, how do I keep doing that on the civilian side to not only keep me tied into the community, but also help guys that are trying to get to the regiment to have the experiences that I just experienced, but also try to negate them from making some of the same mistakes that I made. So with that, I started Green Beret Chronicles on YouTube, and I've just been sharing my experience and also coaching and mentoring these younger guys as they get ready to go towards the regiment.
I love it. And I hope as we get through this discussion that we'll talk about what you did to prepare yourself when it was your turn to go into selection and be ready. But before that, I think you have a very interesting upbringing. So I want to start there. It's not the natural, doesn't sound like the natural where you grew up in small town America. So please share with us what that looked like.
Of course. So I was born in Haiti. I was one out of 8 kids. So my mom and dad made the decision pretty much very early on that we weren't going to grow up in Haiti. So with that in mind, they had a plan. They started executing and doing whatever they needed to do to get all 8 of us to the United States. So the first thing that they did was they went from Haiti to France, and they did that, of course, by farming, by working the land to save enough money to travel to France. Once they got to France, they sent for my older brother and my older sister, and then the rest of us stayed in Haiti. And then once they got to France, they spent 4 years there, worked their butt off, and then they were able to get to the United States. Once they got to the United States, they spent a couple of more years there working, and then they had enough money to send for us. But in the meantime, again, my grandmother raised me and the rest of my siblings in Haiti. And then once I turned 10, my little brother and I, we traveled to the United States. And then just to correct my mistake, so four of us were born in Haiti, and then the other four were born in the stateside, actually. So yeah, once I got to the States, it was like drinking through a fire hose, right? Because I was 10 years old. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know anything as far as the school system went. And on top of that, I went to New York City, probably one of the craziest places you can go to. So yeah, got there and I jumped right into public school because, of course, my mom and dad, they had things to do. They had to keep working to survive in New York City. So they didn't have time to integrate my brother and I. It was like, hey, welcome to the United States. You're going to school next week, So here I am, 10 years old, can't speak English, didn't have any friends, and I pretty much had to figure it out. So I went through it, learned the language, made it all the way up to high school, graduated high school, and then around that time, 9/11 happened, and then I had a decision to make whether I was going to keep going to school or join the military. Um, with all that in mind, I had my stay at college mainly because my parents, being immigrants, they wanted us to have an education. That was their thing. Like, hey, we made all these sacrifices, got you guys to the States, you owe us education. So um, I did my best. One semester later, 1.5 GPA later, it wasn't working out for me. So I went down the road and I spoke with a New York City cop recruiter, and I was like, "Hey, um, I love what this country's done for not only my siblings but also my parents. I want to find a way to serve. I want to be a New York City cop." And they were like, "Yep, no problem. Here are the prerequisites. You either have 2 years of college or you have military experience." Well, I already knew the college credits or the 2 years of college wasn't going to work out. So, with that in mind, I went towards the military route with the intent of getting the military experience, getting out, and then being a New York City cop. But once I got to the military, it just came like it came easy to me, and I love what I was doing, and I stayed. And 20 years later, here we are.
How did your family take the idea of you going into the military?
They actually took it pretty well because I had a older brother. My older brother had joined the Navy while I was in high school, so he and I went to the same high school. And then when it was time for him to figure out what he was going to do, he ended up going to the Navy because my parents weren't able to pay for his college, and he didn't want all the debt. So he ended up going to the Navy. So that initially exposed me to the military. So when it was time for me to have that conversation with my folks, they were already prep, right? So yeah, they didn't want me to go. Like all parents, they try to protect their kids, especially since the war was going on at that time, because 2003 was when I enlisted. So you had Iraq going on and Afghanistan. So both wars were going on. So they didn't want me to go towards that. So they did the best. But at the end of the day, I was one out of eight kids and they had enough on their hands. And I was old enough to start taking care of myself. And that's the route that I took to be able to make that happen, essentially.
Do you think you would have gone in if 9/11 hadn't happened? Was that kind of a catalyst for you?
No, I think I still would have gone because, again, my brother was already there and I just wasn't a student as far as college goes. That wasn't going to work out. So I needed another outlet. And I've always been a quiet kid. I've always wanted to do this type of stuff because I remember back in, right before I came to the States, 1994, around that time, of course. The U.S. military was in Haiti. So I remember looking up and seeing the helicopters flying above, and I remember seeing the American soldiers. So at a very early age, I saw that and I was like, man, I want to try to do that if I ever get to the States. So when I had my chance, there was no second guessing it. I knew right then and there that's what I was going to do.
You mentioned the idea of the US has given you a lot as you were kind of making this decision. And I came to the States when I was 13 also. Well, maybe a little bit before you were, but I grew up in Africa and the Middle East, and I just had this idea of what America was, but my parents were both American. But it still was a culture shock to me. In your mind, when you say like this country gave you so much at that point in your life, what comes to mind for you?
Just the ability to leave Haiti and come to the States, and just seeing how the other half lives, right? Because in Haiti, we grew up in mud huts, no shoes, we're, drinking water from the canals, pretty similar to Africa, right? And then just to come to the States and be welcomed as immigrants with literally nothing, and being able to make our way, being able to allow to work, to essentially build our family last name, was something that I don't, till this day, I don't think could happen anywhere else except for this country, right? So yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that it did for us, was not only did it allow us the opportunity to flourish, but it also gave us security too.
Um, and maybe just the last part here on your childhood, when you mentioned immigrant parents, right? And I think there's maybe a connotation that goes along with like the hard work that's required and the expectations
Yeah.
of every kid when you've got immigrant parents. How much do you think that influenced your success in the military? Because a lot of guys, when they join up, this is the first time they've had hardship like that. Sounds like this was probably not. I mean, you grew up by yourself almost for 10 years. How much did that influence you?
Yeah, it has everything to do with it, to be honest with you, because every time I came across hardship, or every time I came across adversity, I would always reference back to my folks, like, hey, they did everything they could to escape Haiti. Like, we still have family members that are there right now dealing with what's going on in that country. And the fact that they had the mental toughness and the smarts to essentially play chess as they were trying to get to United States and make it happen. Like, and I'm here, and like, I don't have any excuse. That's always been my mindset. Even post military, as I'm trying to figure out how to, build whatever it is that I'm trying to build, I always reference that, like, hey, my folks did it with nothing. So what's my excuse when I have everything available to me? So that's always been my motivation, sort of.
Got it. And I know we're going to get into the Green Beret side, but that's not how it starts, right? You end up as a 12 Bravo out of the gate. So the question I like to ask everybody is, anything crazy happen with the recruiter for you as you were selected in that?
Yeah. So my brother initially went to the Navy. He got out, and then came back to New York City. Realized that he missed the military. It was doing so much for him, so he ended up going back to the Army. So he went in the Army, and he left a couple of months before I enlisted. So he actually linked me up with his recruiter that put him in. So I linked up with his recruiter, which my brother already had a relationship with, and his recruiter actually brought me in, took care of me, made sure that I got everything taken care of, make sure I went in as an E3, and actually gave me the job that I wanted. So I was lucky on that front, because my brother already worked with that recruiter, and he pretty much told him to take care of me, and that's exactly what took place. So I was luckier than most.
Why the 12 Bravo route?
So they showed me this video, which I think they show everybody that gets them caught up, right? They show us the video of us blowing up bridges, of us building all these different obstacles and then blowing them up. And after watching that video, I was like, "Yep, I want to go do that. Like, I want to go blow stuff up." Then I got to basic training. I got to my unit. None of that happened. So, so I was disappointed.
At that moment, as you were signing up, was SF something even in your mind at the time? Did you know about it?
No, no, not at all. Like, I didn't even know what it was. And I think it's just one of those things that has to do with exposure. Growing up in New York City, I not only was I busy learning the culture and the language and everything else that comes with being an American. Once I decided to go towards the military, all I know was what was available. I didn't, yeah, I didn't honestly didn't know this was a thing until a couple of years into my military career. So yeah, no, I had no idea.
And keep me honest here, Jay. So 12 Bravo is kind of the combat engineering side of the mill.
Correct, correct. So it's combat engineering. It has everything to do with demining. All right, and then you have building bridges, building roads. So it's like we can build it, but we can also destroy it. Back in Vietnam, like the tunnel rats, those were combat engineers, right? So pretty strong lineage there, dating all the way back to all the different conflicts that you can think about. So I absolutely love the job once I got to do some of the things that the video showed.
how how was your reception at your first unit? Like, I'm sure coming out of New York City, you probably, I mean,
Um,
that's just such a melting pot. But the
yeah.
army is too. So how was it?
Yeah. So so I went through basic training, went through that, had majority of my hardship at basic training. Because I think like most of us that aren't used to that, we go into basic training and it's a rude awakening, right? I grew up in New York City, so I felt like that I had that chip on my shoulder of being, a tough guy and all this, all that. That didn't last long in basic training. The drill sergeant quickly nipped that in the butt because and it was funny because when we left out of New York City, there was like six of us. We were like a little crew, and we all had the same job. We all went through the same platoon, so it was like, yeah, we're the tough guys. And then 16 weeks later, like we were all at parade rest, just as dressed as they come. So they broke us down pretty good. But once I got to my unit, um, it was just fast and furious because I got there just in time um, to catch the invasion. So I got there in 2003, July, and in September of 2003, we were deploying to Kuwait and making our way into Iraq. So I really didn't have time to get acquainted and deal with some of the stuff that folks deal at their actual units.
Where was the unit when you got there in Iraq or in Kuwait? So like what was the unit's mission at that point? Because 2003, so much happened in Iraq at that time.
Yeah, so when I got to Fort Riley, the unit was still there. So I got to Fort Riley, met my platoon sergeant, met my LT and my squad leader, and then they got me spun up, and then we deployed in September. We went through Kuwait at the time, which, well, everyone was going through Kuwait. And the initial mission wasn't cleared to me because, again, I was a PFC at that time. I didn't know what was going on. I was just there for the party, right? And then once and then once we got in country, that's when everything kind of developed as far as what they had us doing.
And what was your initial kind of mission for you in that role as a 12 Bravo at that point in time? Like, what were you guys being asked to do?
Yeah, so when we first got there, we got stationed right outside of Ramadi in a small town called Chaldea. And the initial invasion, because as soon as we went in there, majority of the Iraqi military they fled their posts to include this this ammo point that pretty much housed all the 155s, 105, and all the heavy munitions. So they left their posts and they fled. They got into civilian clothes. They just didn't want to fight us, but there was still a threat there. So when we got there, all that stuff was just scattered all over the place. And as engineers, we were tasked to police all that stuff up and then destroy them. Right. So the first couple of months, we were in charge of this big ASP. It was just open desert. Anybody that's been Iraq, they know because I think it's Q West is right there, and a couple of it's this big open desert with a bunch of bunkers. And what was happening is a lot of insurgents were breaking into the ASP, and they were still in those rounds, and that's how they were creating IEDs and putting all that stuff out. So they tasked my company to pull guard on that ASP. So first thing we did, I'll never forget this, because of course it's still pretty hot. They had us put out a triple stand concertina wire because of course that's an engineer job. So I'm talking miles of it, like the entire ASP. We just secured it essentially by putting out concertina wire. So we're out there full battle rattle. with a picket pounder and pickets and concertina wire, and we're just laying everything out for miles on end. It's just horrible times. But and then once we got done with that, we had to go build the OPs, sandbags, and then we started pulling guard on the ASP, pretty much patrolling it, making sure no one was breaking in and stealing rounds. We've caught a couple of dudes because they would cut the concertina wire, right? Because they knew where the dead spots were. Because we had a bunch of different towers, and then we had roving patrol. So they would lay into the prone, wait for us to go by, and then run up, cut the wires, go underneath it, grab the rounds, and then go set up IEDs. So, and then we would find a hole, fix it, and it was just like rinse and repeat for at least the first 3 or 4 months.
And then eventually you end up doing route clearance, right? In this AO?
Yes, yes, because yeah, so the powers that or the brains of the operations, whoever it was at that time, I can't remember which general was in charge of Iraq at that time. They started to see a threat that was slowly because until 2003, like there was no big IED threats, right? So they started to see this emergent threat of, hey, we're trying to get supply out of Kuwait to all these different military installations, but the convoys, they keep getting blown up by these IEDs. So they're like, well, who do we have within our outfit that can take care of this problem? They were like, well, 12 Bravos, they deal with landmines, like it's same thing, right? I was like, no, it's not the same thing. But anyways, they tasked us with conducting route clearance at that time, and all route clearance is right at I just call it bait. It's all it is, right? It's like, hey,
Yeah.
you get in these soft shell vehicles because at that time there was no up armored vehicles, right? You get into these Humvees that you deployed over here with these track vehicles, and then you drive down this route. And if you see anything that looks out of place, secure it and call EOD. Right. So we did that for the remainder of the trip, as well as pulling guard at the ASP that housed all the munitions that were being used to create these IEDs.
Were there any particular route clearance ops that you did that are still memorable to you? Like maybe you were securing something and you got ambushed during the assault. Did you hit IEDs yourselves?
Yeah, yeah. So this one is one that sticks with me till this day. Probably because it's the most it was the deadliest one. So I remember. So again, we were using track vehicles, M112. It's pretty much a APC on a track that engineers use. So that's what we were conducting rock clearance in, because at that point we didn't have the RG31s or the 33s that we have right now. We didn't have what's called the Buffalo, which is this big armored vehicle with a claw that we used to dig up the IEDs. Like we didn't have any of that advanced tech. So we deployed with what we had out of Fort Riley, and that's what we were conducting rock clearance in. And I get it, right? We didn't know what we didn't know. So on this particular day, we were tasked with clearing a route for a convoy that was coming out of Kuwait, passing through and delivering some goods to a nearby F.O.B. So it was like any other day. We leave the F.O.B and we're conducting route clearance. The way this one is set up, you had the driver, then you had the gunner, and then we have what's called a troop hatch. It's just an open hatch that four guys are standing out of. Right, you figure we're clearing IEDs, but we're still standing out of the hatch. So I was the rear gunner with the 249. I had my buddy right next to me, and then you had two other guys pulling security, kind of like a little porcupine of death. Right, everybody's is facing out, and the driver and the gunner, they're scanning for IEDs. So on this particular day, I was the second vehicle, and then there was two other vehicles behind me. So a 4 vehicle convoy clearing this route, because we would clear it and then we would send up the word, hey, we just cleared it. And then the convoy would go through. In the meantime, the convoy would go to our F.O.B and they would just park there until we tell them they're good to go. So we're clearing this route, and we go on this slight uphill with some drop offs on both of the sides. And and I remember we're going, and it's weird because I never heard the explosion. I just saw like a big cloud of dirt. And then once the smoke cleared, since I was facing the rear, my vehicle was asking for a status update. It was like, hey, like what's going on back there? And I'm like, wait for the smoke to clear. I'm like, hey, a big IED just went off, but I can see vehicles back here. Like I see the track, like it went off the road a little bit, but I can still see it. Um, and I'm thinking like, okay, they completely miss, right? Because I can see the vehicle behind me. But what I didn't realize was vehicle number three what actually got hit and it was completely destroyed. Because I remember looking up and the engine block was floating towards the troop hatch where me and my buddies were standing. And as soon as we saw it, I tapped the gunner and he kicked the driver in the head and the driver pulled up and then the engine block felt right there. And that's when it started to sink in that holy crap, this entire vehicle just got blown to pieces essentially. And later on, we found out it was a 600-pound bomb that they packed in from both sides of the little hill. So when it went up, it kind of created like the mushroom effect and kind of just took that entire track and just completely destroyed it. And I remember that day because specifically because we didn't have uh, um, a QRF on standby. So they had to get everybody spun up. But in the meantime, my buddies and I, we literally had to, go grab trash bags and start picking up body parts of our buddies and putting it in trash bags. And that's how we were able to secure them. Yeah. Yeah. So we secured the site. And then we pretty much went out and we did that and until replacement showed up. So because what we didn't want is to leave uh, any parts of our buddies out there. So we pretty much did hands across America and just pushed out and looked for whatever we can find, and we put them in trash bags, and then we took all that back to base camp. So, and that was 6 months into the deployment. You know what I mean? So that's the one that sticks with me till this day. You figure I'm 19, man, experiencing this.
Yeah, I was 19 years old. You're in country 6 months, and so some of the people
Yeah.
we've interviewed, Jay, we've interviewed probably 150 vets now, and I think the consistent theme that I hear is the hardest things that they've ever had to do. One is notifying family of a death, and the other is picking exactly what you
Yeah.
just said, like picking up a friend and putting him in a bag. Like
Yeah.
I don't know, how did you handle it in the moment doing that? Is it just, hey, this is my job, I got to do it? I presume
Um,
the guys who were in that vehicle.
yeah, yeah, because they was all in my squad. So it was one of those things that I didn't really know how to handle it. I think it was a shock to me. I think it was a shock to everybody because we all kind of just stood around. And I remember vividly one of my buddies saying, "Hey, Davis," which he was a pretty good buddy of ours, because it's one of those things like once you get in the country and you're literally around these dudes every day, 24/7, 7 days a week, and I'm sure you could relate to this. You just like form this bond that's like no other. It's weird because yeah, it's hard to explain, but you become so close with those dudes to where like you'll joke around, like you get to learn everything about them. And Davis was one of those dudes that we had in the squad, and one of my buddies was like, "Hey, uh, like Davis, his body's over there and he's decapitated." Now, keep in mind, to my ignorance, like I didn't, I wasn't as familiar with the English language, so I didn't know what that term meant. So I was like, "What does that mean?" And he was like, "Yeah, his head is completely gone." And I was like, so I walked over there and I saw it, and I was like, "Man, like this is what war is." And then once we got done with the police call, we loaded up and we went back to base camp, and it was just a silence for at least 48 hours. And then we were right back at it again because again, we were the security for the supply routes, and the supply route couldn't like we couldn't afford to let it stop, right? So we had to figure out how to find that motivation, find that gumption, and just go right back out and keep pushing on, and that's what we did.
That was so early in the war. So like a lot of the how we handled deaths, we were still learning there. Like, do you remember when you went back to the base that night, what you all talked about, how you did you discuss it at all? Probably but potentially not.
No, no. So there was no talking at all, and the way we had our base set up, because again, this is still the infancy of the war. We just had open, like we took over like an abandoned building at one of the Iraqi Air Force bases, and we just kind of built like cubicles on the inside. And I remember vividly like us going back there, and everybody just kind of went to their room and just kind of laid down, and it was just silence all the way around. Like I don't think neither of us ever discussed what actually took place. And of course, we went on, never really talked about it. And then once guys got back, that's when the real trouble started. As far as guys just losing their minds, doing dumb stuff, me included. I was lucky that I was able to find an outlet and went and spoke to somebody and got my mind right, which enabled me to keep serving. But some of my buddies, like they never really left Iraq essentially, right? Even till this day.
Wow. If I don't remember, we have to circle back on the help that you sought out, because I think
Mhm.
at that young age, it's pretty remarkable and very rare that somebody does
Yeah,
that. But I also want to ask,
sure.
when you go back to that abandoned building, presumably Davis's gear is there, like his cot, whatever he's
Yeah,
using.
yeah.
Like what do
Mhm.
you do with that stuff there?
Yeah, so in all, we lost 5 guys that day, right? So everybody that was in that track ended up getting blown up. Davis was just he was the biggest piece that we found because his body was still intact. His head was gone because he was on the side um, that the IED just kind of blew it off. So when we went back, of course, we had to pack up all the equipment. Um, um, Now, I want to say, yeah, so one of the platoons that was back there actually did all of that while everybody else was just laying around. But yeah, one of the platoons came in, they packed up all the stuff. And by the time we got back, some of that stuff was removed. And of course, it gets packed up and then shipped back to the States. But yeah, that's how that actually went down. But I've been in instances before where we had to pack up our buddy's stuff because we were the only ones there. Right. So yeah.
Did you end up writing a letter home before you deployed or after that? Like, I don't know, kind of coming to grips with the fact that could have
No,
been you?
no, I really didn't know military I guess etiquette, right? I didn't know I had to write a letter and send it to my mom in case I didn't make it. I didn't know I was supposed to leave a letter behind. I didn't know any of that. So after that incident, though, I did start to write a little bit more home to my mom and dad. But leading up to that point, I was just just out there getting after it. But yeah, that definitely changed a few things for me.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, and we'll get right back to this combat story. Today's podcast is sponsored by Nutrisense. That was the sound of the Nutrisense biosensor that I've been wearing. Nutrisense is a really helpful tool that teaches me about the food and drink choices that affect my body and how to better manage stress, sleep, think about exercise, and more. I've tried other glucose monitors in the past, and they just did not compare to the Nutrisense system. For starters, the Nutrisense app is the key that I've been looking for because it gives me a clear view of what my glucose levels are in real time, tracks my steps, I can enter my daily meals and calories, and more. I used this during my episode with Jay, in fact, and could see that the coffee I drank at the beginning of the show had little effect on my glucose, which is great, but the beer I had, a lager, later on, increased my glucose, but not in a drastic way. Still, this is the kind of detail I've been looking for. To start decoding your body's messages and pave the way for a healthier life, visit nutrisense.com/combat and get $30 off your first month and 1 month of board certified nutritionist support. When they ask you how you learned about Nutrisense, make sure to tell them it was the Combat Story podcast. That's nutrisense.com/combat for $30 off your first month and 1 month of board certified nutritionist support. And now back to this combat story. So you mentioned earlier when you got back from that deployment, you sought some kind of help. Can you describe what you did and why?
Yeah, yeah. Because once we got back, man, again, where at this point I'm 19. K State was right there, and Manhattan, Kansas. So once we got back, we're a bunch of privates. We're war veterans. We've seen some stuff, and we were just going out there and just wreaking havoc. I'm talking about like we were going out and getting into fights with the college kids like every weekend, and we were destroying them. And I remember one day or one weekend we were out there getting after it, and we got in trouble. The cops got called, and the cops came out, and one of them snatched up my buddy that we were deployed together, right? Because again, after you deploy and you have that type of bond with your buddies, like you're in the States and you're like, hey, nobody messes with my dudes, you know what I mean? So the cops, rolled them up. And here I come out of nowhere. I'm like, oh, don't touch my battle buddy. Like we've seen some things together. And I put my hands on the cop and I, threw him. You know what I mean? And of course, I got rolled up because I assaulted a cop. So they rolled both of us up, me and my buddy. They take us downtown. They threw us in jail. And at that time, I had this no nonsense first on. He just came in. Of course, they go through all the procedures. They call the MPs. The MPs call the unit, and they're supposed to come get you. Well, my first one was like, nope, leave him in there, right? So he left us in there, and then he picked us up in the morning. And then I, of course, had to deal with all the legal issues, right? So it was pretty much it was written up as a felony because I put my hands on a cop, which is not supposed to happen. So, of course, I'm sitting back in my barracks room and I'm sweating bullets while this develops. I'm like, holy crap, like my military career is over. I had this dream of doing X, Y, and Z. And now it's coming to an end because of my stupidity. And went to court. Of course, I've never gotten in trouble before. The folks down there were very understanding. They understand that we're in a moment in our country where this is happening a lot because of the war and soldiers, are seeing a lot of things. And they pretty much busted down to a misdemeanor. All I had to do was some community service, and I had to go to the police station and apologize to 3 separate shifts of cops. So after that went down, that was like an eye opener for me. And I'm like, okay, well, I clearly have to find a way to get this anger out of me. I can't keep going forward, like, because I still had 2.5 years left of my enlistment. So after that eye-opening session, I got with my leadership and I was like, hey, check it out. Like the stuff that we saw over there, like what do we have available to us so I can, maybe trying to get right if I, choose to keep serving. At this point, I just gotten promoted to E4. Yeah, just gotten promoted to E4. And they were like, hey, you can go to uh, go see the PA. He'll write some stuff up, and then you can go see the psych. So I went to the PA, got into mental health, and just kind of worked through some of that. And then once I, went through that, spoke with the chaplain a couple of times, and pretty much kind of, mend my mind around war and death and all of that stuff. And going forward, it really hasn't been a factor for me anymore, mainly because I convinced myself that, hey, this is what war is, and regardless of where you're at, if it's your time to go, you're gonna go, right? And I've seen it play out over my entire career, where my buddies and I would be downrange, slinging lead, through some horrific stuff, make it out of that just to get stateside and get hit by a car on a motorcycle, right? And I'm like, well, that proves my point, right? When it's your time to go, you're gonna go regardless of where you're at. So that's been my mindset throughout my entire career.
So you kind of came to terms with the idea, like I could die doing this, or anywhere else, but it was more kind of like at the forefront of your mind now, like you just have accepted it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
There cannot be many people who are 19 in the military who went and sought out a psych. Honest to God, it's got to be such a low number. I'm amazed and so impressed.
Well, I was the only one out of that entire group that actually did that. So,
yeah. No, it's fantastic. Did your parents know that you spent a night in jail?
No. They do now.
Oh, geez. Were you more worried about them than your first sergeant? Like if your mom had found out?
Yeah, it was one of those things. Being born to immigrant parents, it was one of those things. Like I was more afraid of of letting them down and being a burden to them on top of everything that they have going on, which is why it was so imperative that I went and got the help that I needed because I realized like this is it, right? This is it for me. Like I try college, like this is it. So I need to make sure like this works. All right. And I had to do everything that I could to make sure that it did.
Obviously, you lose some friends in that first rotation. You're back, you get in these fights. Were you enjoying the work? Like, is this what you thought you were signing up for?
So to an extent, because we were still blowing stuff up, we were still demining in a sense, right? Finding IEDs and dispose of them. Yeah, I was actually enjoying it, minus the losing friends part, but everything else was actually uh, pretty fun. Yeah.
Man, where does the SF track start coming into play for you?
So '03 to '04, of course, we had that Iraq rotation, and then got back, got the help that I needed, got on the right path, made rank pretty fast once I did, mainly because all of my buddies from that first trip, they kept getting in trouble. Eventually, they got kicked out or they got out the military. So there wasn't a lot of senior guys left from that actual deployment. It was me and a handful of dudes. So I was looked at as, essentially one of the leaders because I had experienced it. So I made E5 and E6 within the first 4 years of my career. And then '07, '08, we deployed again, this time to Crete, Iraq, conducting the same mission, route clearance. Only this time we had the RG-31s, we had the Buffaloes, and the U.S. was starting to catch on as far as what we need to actually conduct this mission properly. So I went through that deployment. This one was 15 months because it was the time that stop loss. Yeah, it was the stop loss came around that time. So I did 15 months of route clearance, and it just got like that's the one that broke me. I was like, man, I'm done with this. So after that deployment, came back and just started exploring other options.
Let me ask you something real quick, Jay. When you're on that second deployment, presumably since you're E6 at the time, like you're leading, you presumably you're leading these troops now. They're your responsibility, but you've seen what can happen, right, from that first rotation. How does that change your approach when you're on a clearance operation at that point in your career? Like, how do you think of the soldiers under your care? Um, yeah, how do you handle that after what you've seen?
Yeah, so prior to going down there, we did a lot of prep, mainly because I was, a few of the guys that actually went on the first one. And then once we got in the country, it was just being very strict and very tough on them because I know what the outcome could be if we're not, spot on. So I was one of those guys that, like I made sure that they were doing everything that they were supposed to do, plus some, because I didn't want that burden of, packing up somebody's gear or writing letters to the parents. So I was really strict and tough on my dudes. And it worked out. Like we only had one fatality that actual trip, as opposed to the other one or the first one. We had several. So yeah, it was one of our best rotation, and we crushed it. Until this day, some of those dudes are still buddies of mine, and we still play, fantasy football and all that stuff together. And I still get, hey, I came home because of you, or thank you for what you did. We didn't see it at the time, but it's because of X, Y, and Z that I'm here today. So till this day, I hear it and that makes me feel good. But it all came from, of course, that shitty experience from the very beginning, right? That led me up to
Wow.
that point.
Plus 15 months. That's no joke. The extension and having to stick it out. I'm sure being a leader at that time, that's one of the hardest things to
uh,
do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they did give us an extra $1,000 a month on top of that, though. They were like, yeah, you're
All
supposed
right.
to go home. And it was weird because it was literally like we were like 2 or 3 months out. No, we were 2 months out from actually redeploying. And then stop
Oh,
loss hit, and they were like, yeah, we need you an extra 3 months, but here's an extra $1,000 a month. So yeah, that made it a tad bit better.
God. Now, presumably you could have gone the Ranger route, SF. There are a multitude of directions you could have gone. Why did you choose the one that you did?
So initially, my buddies, because there was three of us from that rotation, we were in leadership roles. And after 15 months, I was like, man, there's got to be more out there. Like, I don't want to, keep doing route clearance. And on top of that, the Army had their sight on me because they're like, hey, this guy's getting promoted pretty fast. Let's make him a drill sergeant and all this other stuff. And I had a squad leader with me at the time, and he went to selection. And that was my initial exposure to it. And I was like, selection, what is that? And then he schooled me up on it. I did some research. He went and he didn't make it. And I'm like, man, this dude's pretty high speed. Like, and he still didn't get picked up. Like, let me try my go at this. And then I went a couple of months later and I got picked up. So I essentially went without fully knowing exactly what it was. But that was my initial exposure to it.
And you got through the first time around, Jay?
Yeah. So I still give him shit till this day because I got picked up and he didn't. He hates it.
So let's, obviously we mentioned at the outset the Green Beret Chronicles and helping other guys get into this track. What did you do to prepare yourself for it, even though you didn't know as much about it maybe as some other guys? What were the pros and cons of your approach then?
So I've always been in shape. So getting ready for selection physically wasn't a problem because I've always been in the gym. Because my initial thought when I came in the Army was like, you're gonna pay me to work out, to shoot guns, and I can get to deploy and go see the world, and you're gonna pay me for all that. So I've always loved it for that particular reason. So I've always been in shape. So the physical aspect wasn't a problem. It was more of the mental prep and then the land nav prep that almost got me while I was over there. I prepared a little bit, but I wasn't as prepared as I should have been prior to going. So now that I'm on the other side, I try to let these kids know, hey, you want to do land nav, you want to make sure you're mentally ready for what you're about to face. So I try to share as much as that as possible so guys walk in and they can actually succeed through the knowledge that I'm able to provide.
What are some of the more common weaknesses you see in people who are trying to go that route today that you're helping them overcome?
It's the mindset, man. Like just today, I spoke with 4 guys on a mentorship call, and a lot of them are already planning an exit. Right. A lot of them are like, well, I'm going to do the 18 X-ray contract. However, if that doesn't work out, then what do you think about this? Or, hey, I'm going to go to selection, but in case I don't make it, what do you think about that? And I had to stop them right there. And I tell them, hey, if you have a plan B while you're going to selection, you're going to end up executing it because selection is meant to, push you to your limits to where whatever plan B is going to look really, really good. Right. And majority of the folks are going to choose plan B. But if you go in there with just plan A and that no fail mentality, then you should be fine. So nowadays, that's the hardest thing that I'm finding that I have to overcome with some of these newer guys because they're already planning not only to fail, but what they're going to do once they do fail. Right. And it's hard to switch somebody's mindset to, hey, man, check it out. Don't think about plan B. All right. Plan A and that's it. Right. Because once you're a team week and you're carrying that 400-pound, pilot, and you don't have anything left in the tank, then you're going to gravitate towards plan B. Right. And that's how majority of the guys quit.
I love that. I've never heard that, like no plan B. And people have heard me say this on this podcast, but I remember when I was going through the farm, I think when I went through flight school, I was too young to know this. But when I was going through the farm at the agency, like somebody was going to have to pry me out of there, like with my dead body. Yeah. Like there was no way I was walking out of there. And there were guys after I left who would come to me and we'd talk and they'd have that plan B or like, I don't know. And I was like, you got to make them pull you out of there completely. Like you've left everything there. But if these people didn't make it, and it's funny, like the way you put it is spot on. That's really cool to hear. Okay. So you go through selection. What language do you end up getting? Tell me it's French and they rely on your Asian background.
So it was French actually, right?
All
Because
right.
it was one of those things. After selection, I sat down with the cadre and they were like, "What job do you want?" I was like, "18 Charlie." Why? Because that's the equivalent to 12 Bravo, right? And then
Yep.
they were like, "What language you want?" I was like, "I already speak French, right?" So it all worked out. I got a 12 Bravo, and I got I got 18 Charlie, and I got French, right? Which made it that much more smoother of a transition going through the Q course.
Nice. Did you, because you got French, does that mean automatically you're going to third group?
No. So at that time,
Mhm.
10th group had Africa because
Ah,
once Afghanistan started in 2001, third group being the degenerates that we are, we switch our entire AO. So we literally said, "Hey, um, Africa, there's nothing going on in Africa. Like I don't care what you do with it, but we're done going to Africa." And then we switch our AO to Afghanistan. And at that time, 10th group picked up Africa. So all the French speakers were going over there. So I actually got orders for a 10th group, and then a classmate of mine, he got orders for third group. Well, I didn't want to go to 10th, and he didn't want to go to third. So we had the same job and the same language, so we just swapped. So he ended up going to 10th, I ended up going to third.
why didn't you want to go to 10th? Presumably they would deploy, no?
Yeah, well, because at that time, my wife was going to ECU. She was going to college at ECU, and I didn't want to have to move her again because I moved her out of K State to North Carolina, and now I'd have to move her out of ECU to Colorado. So I used that argument, and the command agreed, and they swapped us. So that was a win.
Okay, great. It's not often that you hear the wisdom of the Army assigning French to a French speaker. So I'm glad to hear that that worked out. Can you tell us about your arrival to your first unit with third group? Like, what was it like when you came in? Any rough stories of breaking you in? Was it just, hey, come on in and get to work?
No, so the same thing that happened with me when I got to Fort Riley, Kansas, happened with me when I got to third group. So I got to third group. So I graduated February of 2010, and I took some leave, and in May of 2010, I report to third group. Well, I ended up going to First Battalion, a third Special Forces group, and they were already deployed. So I went to the headquarters element. They told me not to unpack, get all my crap together, and I went straight into Afghanistan from the Q
Wow.
course. So I go to Afghanistan. I get to a Bath, which is Bagram Airfield. I went there, did some training at the headquarters element to get me where I needed to be, and then I went straight to Kandahar, to link up with my first team down there. So, and then once I got there, the guys were so busy doing work that they didn't really have time to mess with me. They was like, "Yeah, man, just go sit over there. Like we got operations to plan, we got stuff to do." So I didn't get the full brunt of the new guy time. So
How are you feeling getting into that community now that like you're downrange with the special ops community as opposed to being big conventional army from your past deployments?
so I loved it, man. I loved it because being in big army, like I always preach to my guys that follow me on the channel, that at that point you're being reactive, right? As a like you go out, especially from a 12 Bravo perspective, you go out, you conduct route clearance, you're bait, you're waiting for stuff to happen. And once it does happen, then you react, right? You're not even chasing the enemy at that time. You might, shoot off a couple of rounds, but you're reacting. An IED go off, you go through your battle drill and you're reacting, right? You go on patrol as an infantry guy, you get attacked, you're reacting. Battle drill, 1 Alpha, whatever. Like you're reacting to everything that's taking place. Once I got to special operations and I saw how we were moving, like we were being proactive, like we were hunting dudes. We were like, hey, we know there's a pattern of IEDs being placed along Highway 1 right here. Like, what are we going to do to make sure that doesn't happen again? Right? 18 Fox, get me some intelligence, right? Go talk to whoever you need to speak with. get the intelligence, and let's go get this dude, and not give him an opportunity to put IEDs on our road. So that's what we were doing, right? That's the biggest change between the big army and SF, right? Or special operation in whole. Like, we're proactive in hunting the enemy and keeping them on their toes, as opposed to big army, like we're just targets and reacting as things happen.
Having been the 12 Bravo and seen people get hit with IEDs, did it give you any different sense of urgency, like when you were on the special ops side, to make those guys safe who are still out there clearing routes themselves?
Yeah, that was definitely extra motivation for me, because I know what it can do to, people, vehicles. So I'm like, hey, if that, and we were right next to a big army base too. So I was like, hey, if we can be proactive and start hunting these dudes before they put these IEDs out, like, not only is that going to be a win for us, but it's also going to build a lot more rapport with the big army unit that was across the street. And of course, we're a small entity, so we want to, mend those relationships. So whenever we need stuff, we can go to them, and vice versa. And that's exactly what ended up happening. Like, we once we got in the country and we started doing work, IED threat around our AO started to go down. Big army had, a lot better freedom of movement, and everything was going according to plan.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned keeping up those good relationships with Big Army. Like, we were Big Army when I was in Coast, and Third Group was there, and they did such a great job of just being so close with us, like giving us shirts and coins and like cool ops that we would never get to run otherwise. And it was exactly what we all wanted to do. And they knew that. And you're a small unit, so like, you need lift capability, you need attack when you need it, and they just made sure we were going to deliver it, and it was so well choreographed.
Yeah,
so I hear you on that.
Yeah.
Just briefly before we jump into kind of what you experienced in that new uniform, as you go through this military kind of career up until that point, you've gone through a lot of training, you've gone through the deployments, leadership, promotions. How much, if at all, did race come into play for you?
None whatsoever. Because that's also a question that I get a lot of since I started doing YouTube with Green Beret Chronicles. Folks that look like me will reach out and they'll ask like, hey, we don't really see a lot of minorities in that field. Like, what's your experience like? And I tell them straight up, I was like, hey, once you get to that level, and I'm sure it's the same with you being with the agency. Once you get to that level and you're operating at such a high level, and you're, operating behind enemy lines and all that stuff, like, nobody cares. All they care about is your ability to cover their backs, right? Like, once I get in the shit and I'm slinging lead, and we're fighting, all you're able to do your job, all you're able to handle your own, and that's all the guys cared about. Right. And same thing with me. Once I got to, run my own team as a team sergeant. Right. I told the guys the same crap. Like, hey, like, I don't care what color you are. I don't care what sex you are. Like, I don't care about any of that. My job as a team sergeant is to train you to the best of my ability, to take you down range and bring you back to your mother and to your father. Right. And if you can't cut it, you're not leaving, Fort Bragg. Like, if you can't meet the standards, then you're not going down range. So, till this day, like, my 15-year stay at Special Operation, it's just been nothing but awesome. Never had any, crazy experience that, guys in the civilian sector experience with racism or any of that crap. It was, you'll have your, a team room hazing that takes place here and there, but that comes with any type of brotherhood, right? That comes with any type of brotherhood. But it was more so like, hey, are you able to do your job? Are you able to execute at the highest level? And if so, hey, man, welcome to the brotherhood. And that's always how it's been.
Yeah, I get that a lot in questions about politics, like, Republicans, Democrats, men, women flying, and nobody cares except, is the round where it's supposed to be when it needs to be there. Nobody is asking anything else when they need a round on a target.
Exactly.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, DeleteMe, and we'll get right back to this combat story. I was doxxed in the past year. That term might be unfamiliar to some, but basically it means someone went online, collected my information, and then shared it publicly for their own purposes. I had no idea some of this info was out there and available to others. If I'd had DeleteMe, however, they would be actively searching for my personal information online and removing it for me, making it harder for people to use it for their own purposes. In my case, it was just a bad actor using information against me. In other cases, however, it could be a data broker that just wants to sell you something, feed information to you, or about you to others. Data brokers range from people's search websites, background check websites, marketing research agencies, and even credit reporting agencies. They aggregate the data and then license and sell it to other data brokers or to other organizations that might have an interest in that data so they can market info to you or sell you something. When you've got data brokers out there, it's a good reminder that you can also buy a DeleteMe subscription for family members. It's sad, but elderly folks are often targeted by scammers, so getting an account for your parents or the less tech-savvy people in your life can be a useful tool keeping them safe. We all have a right to stay private and protect our personal data. Head to joindeleteme.com/combat. That's joindeleteme.com/combat and use the code COMBAT for 20% off your plan and make it harder for data brokers to get their hands on your info. And now back to this combat story. Okay, so you're at your first team. You're downrange immediately, which is pretty cool. Can you take us through like one of the tougher ops that you experienced that first rotation? Like you're new to this role. What was it like?
Yeah, so the first rotation, so around this time we were doing so it's 2010. I think McChrystal had the had Afghanistan around that time, and the concept of coin counterinsurgency came about. So around this time, we had the mission of conducting what's called VSO, Village Stability Operations. That's when they would take an ODA and literally just drop us off in this town, and we were responsible for that town. So we had to link up with the village elder, ask them for permission to be there. Once they said yes, then we find a compound that was all beaten down, and we will build that up. And then we would essentially integrate ourselves into the actual village. And then we would, eat with them. We would go out and play with them. And then the intent was to create white space so Taliban wouldn't come around that area. So the first couple of months, it was just building up that actual fire base. And then once we got done with that, then we went operational. And then we started running missions. So towards the end there, I remember us going out on just a regular patrol. We knew where the safe haven was for the Taliban. So once we got operational, then we would start venturing out that way to start conducting operation. And I remember this specific day, we venture out towards them, expecting a fight. And that's exactly what we got. And that was actually my first time getting shot at. So we went down to this wadi and we ventured into this village, and all hell just broke loose. And then we got exactly what we went looking for. And then we just, at that point, started maneuvering. And then it was just us fighting, because it took, since we were so far removed from big army, like it took us sort of a while to get air asset out to us. By the time they did, the fight was over. So it was just us bounding and maneuvering and doing everything that we were supposed to do to take it to the enemy. But this specific incident, like I remember I'm maneuvering, and I just saw, like I just happened to look down, and I just saw dirt flying up. And I remember, like, I stopped like an idiot in the open. I stopped, and I looked at my, I think it was my senior Bravo was right next to me at that point. I stopped, I looked at him. I was like, I think we're getting shot at. Like, I was like, those are bullets. And he was like, you idiot, get behind some cover. Yeah, as I almost get my feet shot off. So that was one of the first time in SF that I got shot at. And then the rest of the point was just more of the same, just us trying to push out white space and pushing the Taliban out. But yeah.
Were you all directing Afghan commandos at the time, or was your ODA on its own for that op?
Yeah, so this op was prior to me conducting commandos. So later on, we actually started running commandos. So that trip was 2010. And then in 2012, we deployed again. and then we started running commandos down in sort of east, down at Jaff, and that one was a pretty interesting one too, which I can go into if you like.
Not just yet. So let's stay 2010, because I think when a lot of people think of Green Berets, myself included, just from my experience, it was oftentimes with hundreds of commandos with them. Like, and you are the force multiplier, you're doing that mission set. And it sounds like for your first deployment, it's very much like you're in an ODA out hunting and doing the VSO ops.
Yeah, so this one was a true unconventional a warfare scenario. Like they literally put us in this village. Maywan district was where I was at, and down in Sort of South. We were there in a village. It's just us. We had a attachment of we call them ANASF, so Afghan Special Forces, built just like an ODA, like 2 MOSs per. So there's 12 of them, 12 of us. And then it was just us in a village with no big army around for miles. We would literally order supply, and then we would build the entire fire base from scratch, right? We would eat the local food. We will do all of that. And then we recruited what was called at the time Afghan Local Police, so ALP. So we recruited a local police force. We trained them, and then we employ them around the village, right? So we would, have the ALP commander. We would have them come up. We'd be like, hey, there's been a lot of stuff going on around here. You take your guys that we've trained, that's on our payroll. You go conduct a mission over here. We're going to go over here and conduct a mission. And then that's how we ran it for the longest. But yeah, it was true unconventional warfare, and then just by with and through the guys.
What is an 18 Charlie doing when you're on the FOB, and then when you're on an op? Like, what is it you're most concerned with as a Charlie?
Right. So on the FOB, we're known as the camp mayor, is what they call it. So everything that has to do with the FOB, as far as supply, making sure people have places to. We're essentially supply guys, right? Because every 18 series MOS has a S function to it, right? So the 18 Charlie, our S function is S4. So everything that has to do with logistics, that's the 18 Charlie, right? So we pretty much run the base camp. We build the building. We order the gravel. We get the food for the cook. Like we hire all the construction guys. We do all of that. And on the actual, like once we're out on operations, then we're a shooter, right? We're the EOD guy, and then we're also the demo guy, right? So we do all that. So yeah, everybody has an S function. You have your 18 Bravo. They do S3, which is operations, right? You have your 18 Delta. They're S1. You have your a camo guy. They're S6. So everybody has a secondary job essentially, because it's designed that way to make sure that the ODA is self-sufficient, right? Because if like it's time for us to leave country and awards got to get written up, guess what? The captain has to rate them, and the S1, the 18 Delta, he's going to submit them, right? Hey, deployment's over. It's time for us to go back to the state. Guess what? 18 Charlie, you need to pack up all that gear, right? Then you need to find a bird to put all this stuff on, and you need to make sure that we're good, right? Hey, we just hit country. We don't have comms. 18 Echo, go see Big Army, get ComSec, make sure we're good to go. Yeah, so it's designed that way.
At that point in the war, so 2010, is it common for the ODA, for that team, to stay together for years at a time? Or is it maybe you got 2 years as a team and then several of you dispersed to different teams within third group or outside of third group?
Yeah, so it was offset, because you're always going to have guys with more time in. So when I came in, of course, I was the new guy, but there was guys that had already been on that team for like 3 or 4 years, right? So by the time the second rotation came around, guys were going to SWIC, which is where our schoolhouse is for on rotation as an instructor. There was guys getting out. But I don't think there was that much of a turnover for the second rotation. I think there was like we lost 2 guys and then everybody else was there for the second rotation into Afghanistan.
And you mentioned that that was the first time somebody had shot at you. Was that also the first time you'd had to pull the trigger on somebody else? And I just ask because that's not something that I think a lot of people really might consider that they have to do in their lives. Certainly, you've been in for a while by this time, so you knew it could come. But what was it like the first time you had to pull the trigger on somebody else?
So it was one of those things. Because again, going back to the first couple of deployments, I have already conditioned my mind that, hey, if I'm gonna die, then it's my time to go. With that said, I also wanted to do everything that I could that's within my power to make sure that I didn't die. So as I'm getting shot at, of course, I'm shooting back. And my thought process at that time was, hey, I'm gonna make him die for his cause as opposed to me dying for mine. You know what I mean? If I have to, by all means, it is what it is. But let me make sure that he died for his cause before I actually die for mine. So it was at the moment the training takes over and it's just pure adrenaline, right? So you don't really think about it because that's what we're trained to do. So it's like we're on autopilot at that point. It's like, hey, let me find cover and return fire. All right, once that's good, then we're maneuvering to try to get closer to make sure that rounds are effective. So it was just one of those things that, hey, I'm going to survive and this guy isn't, right? So
Were there any moments after an event like that where you kind of get back to the fob that night and for whatever reason that engagement still stays with you? Because I don't know, you were so close. Um, it was so close, such a close call. Any of those?
I tell you what, man, I tell you what, we're a bunch of, fucking psychos because we get back to the fob and it's just celebration, right? It's not what anybody
Yeah.
would think. It's we get back to the fob and it's like fucking celebration, like, hey, high five, you got your CIB, hell yeah, you know what I mean? There was a lot of that as opposed to, oh man, I almost died today. No, there was none of that. It
Yep.
was just pure celebration and happiness from everybody around because now not only do I get my CIB, I get my, my freaking team patch. We call it it's called a blood patch because you literally was just in a firefight and you possibly took a life. So it's like, hey, here's your blood patch. You know what I mean? So we're yeah, it was just just celebrating all the way around. At no point did anybody say, "Oh, we almost died today." No, no.
Doesn't happen. So, Jay, one of the things that people often ask me as they're listening to this, some of the listeners will ask, are some of the lighter stories or moments that you experience when you're downrange, and just how, with the intensity of what goes on with an op, you kind of go back to the base, as you mentioned, and you joke around. And a lot of times, guys know there's like one person in the unit who's like a big jokester or prankster or whatever. Is there anybody that comes to mind for you with that?
So I remember this time we were on a red cycle task, and all that means is, hey, because just like Big Army, we also have different cycles. We have the amber, green, red. So doing red cycle, we get tasked out just like any other unit to go perform these different missions. So this time, my team gets tagged, and we're in Helena, Montana, on a red cycle tasking, and my buddy, he's a Bravo. He's awesome when he's in combat. Like there's no one else I'd rather be in combat with. This dude, has saved our tail more than we could count, and he's always that dude that we want by our sides. But his decision making is always the worst when he's in the States. So we always make fun of him. So this time we're in Helena, where at one of the local bars because we've just did our job for the day and we're out just blowing some steam. And we're, interacting with the locals because Helena is actually one of the places where the OSS and all that stuff started back in the days. So there's a lineage there. So we're in town, we're hanging out, and me and my other buddy, we're known as the voice of reasoning because I'm not a big drinker, so I'm always sitting back and just kind of surveying the guys, make sure that nobody gets in a fight, and if they do, wrap them up so we can leave. And from across the bar, I see my one buddy, 18 Bravo. His name is Chris. And I watched it in slow motion as he open hand just slaps a guy, right? And again, you can't make this stuff up. He open hand slaps this guy. And of course, we reacted pretty quickly. We go over there, we snatch him up, and then the entire team, we exfil the bar. Like we're out of the bar, we're outside, and we're like, dude, what just happened? And in a grown man, 30 some years old, and all I heard him say was blah blah blah. I had to hit him, and I'm like, Chris, that doesn't make sense. Use your words. What does that mean? He's like, yeah, he was saying blah blah blah, and I had to hit him. We're like, what's blah blah blah? He's like, I don't know. I just heard blah blah blah. So you open the hand, smack the guy because he was saying blah blah blah. So we're like, okay, like we need to just go, right? So we're like, you've clearly had enough. Let's get back to base camp. I think it's Fort. There's a National Guard base there that we were staying in. I think it's Fort Richardson or something along those lines. So we're like, you know what? Let's go. So we try to leave the bar or downtown. And at this point, the guy that got open hand smack, like he was so shocked that he didn't react right away. But while we were outside, he got all his buddies together, and now there's a mob following us as we're trying to make our way to our car, and rightfully so, right? You open and smack a dude in the face, like there's going to be repercussions, especially when it's out in public. So they're following us around, and we get to this garage where we were parked, and around this time, the mob just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I think it was more so people just wanted to see what was going to happen. So we get to a spot. We're like, okay, if they want to fight, we're going to give them a fight. This is going to be a final stance, right? This is it, right? There's one way in, right? The wall is to our backs. They can only come in from right here. Like, this is it, right? So we're all, getting set up. And this is February, right? So it's like 10 degrees out, right? So we're in this parking garage. And, we're talking to each other, getting hyped up. And then we turn around, and my buddy Chris, the same one that open hand smacked the dude, we turn around and he has no shirt on. And we're like, dude, what are you doing? Like, where's your shirt? And he goes, what, man? This is my good shirt. Like, I don't want to get any blood on it. So he takes his shirt off. He folds it nice and neat. And we're like, dude, what are you doing, man? Put your shirt back on. But the mob never ended up coming through the garage. Nothing happened. Nobody went to jail that night. We just got a good laugh out of it. And somebody's, pride got hurt, but that was about it.
Oh,
but yeah,
man.
his decision making in the States is horrible. But in combat, there's nobody else I rather be side by side.
It's awesome. So with that, can you take us to, certainly a separate deployment where, like, maybe one of your tougher missions that you experienced, and in the grand scheme of things, a lot of your missions with SF are tough, but if there are one or two that come to mind that are really challenging.
Yeah. So fast forward, this is 2012, same team. This time, we did such a good job with the VSO app. And of course, the strategy changed from VSO. Now it's just more direct action commandos going in clearing village. So we leave sort of south, and now we're up sort of east. We're running out of Jalalabad Air Force Base, and same group of dudes. And this time we're running first Kandak out of Kabul. Right. We were in country for approximately, I would say, 5 months prior to this op. Leading up to that point, man, we're running around Afghanistan, just conducting 24-hour ops. The way it ran is we would go out for 24 hours under the cover of darkness. We would infill. We would clear an entire village, and then we would do what's called strong point. Strong point just means, hey, all the elements, we find a building, and then we hunker down for the night. We pull security, and then we wait for a sun up, and then we get into firefights, because that's when they mainly attack us, was at night, during the day, because they don't have nods. And then we fight throughout the day, kill as many bad guys as possible, and then we exfil at night. We go back to base camp. We hang out for 48 hours, and then we repeat the same thing, just different villages, right? So that's how we were running for that operation. And the way we would set up, one Kandak is similar to a regular U.S. Army company, right? So you have 3 platoon and correction. It's similar to a military battalion, and then it has 3 companies, and each company has 3 platoons. Right. So every time we went out, we would go out with a company from that Kandak, and that company would be a headquarters element, and then it would have a first platoon, second platoon, and third platoon, right? So about 150 dudes every time we went out. So you have at this time 11 Green Berets and 150 commandos. And the way we task organize ourselves were, you have 2 guys with each platoon, right? So you had 3 platoons. So you had 2 SF advisors with each platoon. So it would be a senior and a junior. A senior guy is a more, I guess, veteran SF guy. So 18 Bravo 1, and then, for example, 18 Charlie 2, right? We would go with first platoon, and we would task organize like that. And then our captain and our team sergeant, he would be with the headquarters element for the commandos. And that's how we would communicate and maneuver on the battlefield. So that's how we would operate. And then, of course, we had our enablers, we had our combat controllers, we had our EOD guy, and then we also had a dog handler with us too. So fast forward to April of 2012, we are on an operation in Logar when my captain gets a phone call from the company commander, right? For the sake of this story, I'm just going to call him Captain Crazy, because whenever I sat down with him to get the details, he's like, yeah, Captain Crazy was what they call me, right? So Captain Crazy, he gets a phone call from the company commander, and he's like, hey, what are you guys doing? Whatever it is, stop. I need you guys to exfil. I need you back at base camp being Jaff, right? So he's like, hey, like, what's going on, sir? Like, give me some more information. We're in the middle of an op, right? So he gets more information. And come to find out, Nuristan, Kamdesh, to be exact, is getting ready to be overran. Now, my captain at the time, team leader, he was with the 173rd back in 2000, and I want to say it was 2008 when he actually deployed to that area, right? And for those that aren't familiar with Kamdesh, Nuristan, so 2009, Cop Katie falls, right? You have the big battle. A couple of guys got Medal of Honors out of it. A couple Americans lost their lives there. And then after that took place, coalition leaders pull all forces out of that area, right? So the folks that were in that area, though, they formed a militia, because they was like, hey, we still live here. We're not going to let the Taliban take it over. So they formed their own militia. And since we've been out of that area, they've been policing it up. They've been conducting operations within that area to keep it safe for them, right? So my captain gets this call, and he's like, oh, hell yeah, I'm definitely going back. Like, I was in that area right before the unit that replaced me lost Katie. So for him, it was personal, right? So he was like, yep, we're on our way. So we exfil out of Logar. We get back to Jaff. And at this point, Captain links up with the company commander to get some more information. We had some CIA contact up at Jaff that had some sources in that area. So we get the full intel picture, and it's like, hey, this is what's going on. Normally, you know, just doing some basic math, when we hear from a source in Afghanistan that there's, 100 fighters, we normally drop a 0. We're like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. There's 10 Afghan, there's 10 Taliban fighters over there, right? So this time the source is saying, hey, there's, 1,000 Taliban fighters in Kamdesh, and they are getting ready to take that entire district, right? So of course we're like, yeah, 1,000 my ass. Like, hey, let's drop it 0. There's about 100, right? Whatever. So we get the entire intel picture. We go back. We plan accordingly, and within 24 hours, we're en route to Kamdesh. So the package that we took was because commandos, like I said, we always bring one company with us. So it's same concept. The same platoon that was out with us, a Logar, they came with us. So 150 commandos, and then the SF package with the enablers. We took 4 CH-47 out there, and then the tricky thing is, and anybody that knows Copcading, you know where the actual place was located. It was located literally in a bowl surrounded by mountains, right? So in that area, there's only one HLZ. Literally, there's one HLZ on top of the mountain. So my captain, knowing this, because he used to serve in that area prior to, he's like, hey, there's one HLZ down there. Like, and he's talking to the flight crew. He's like, where are you going to put us? And of course, they're hesitant because they're like, hey, there's one HLZ. Like, this is a no shit mission where, contact is imminent. So he's like, hey, we're going to put you on Cap Katie, right? So we're like, my captain's like, no, that's not going to happen. Like, you're not, because if they did put us at Cap Katie, we would have to fight up because, again, Cap Katie is in a bowl and it's surrounded by mountains. To get to the point where we needed to be to link up with the militia, we would have to fight uphill, right? So we're like, hey, check it out. This is a national mission. Like, this directive literally came from Hamid Karzai, which was the president at the time. He was like, hey, Nuristan, Kamdesh, it's about to fall. Like, I want commandos in there right now. So since he's the one pushing us down in there and he's telling us that we need to go, then we need to assume some risk here, and you need to put us in a place where we're going to be successful, essentially, right? So we rolled the dice. We were like, hey, it is what it is. We know there's one serviceable HLZ. That's where you're going to put us. Make sure we have an air package with us on infield, and they can prep the area, do whatever they need to do. But this is where we're landing, right? So we take off en route to Kamdesh. En route, we stop at Bostik, which was the nearest FOB there to refuel. And then we leave there, and then we infill into Kamdesh. Surprisingly, nothing crazy happened, right? Because I think the militia had been fighting that entire day. So I think everybody was kind of taking a break. So we ended up landing at the HLZ that was on top of the mountain, right? So we land at this point. My team leader, since he, been to that area before, he knew where the militia was located, right? Because there was a certain OP that we had to go straight to link up with the actual militia. So he's like, yeah, man, once we get there, typically he's, next to the pilots. He's, the last one to get out the bird, right? Because he's vital as the ground force commander. But this time he wanted to take the lead because he's like, hey, I'm just going to go straight to the OP because I know where it's at. So we're like, all right, whatever. Because we trusted him, solid dude. So the choppers landed. Of course, we offset 2 at a time because the HLZ wasn't big enough. All right. So once everybody was on the ground, Captain beelined it straight to the OP, linked up with the militia, who was like, hey, we are your reinforcement. What's going on? And in his words, he was like, check it out. All the good guys are up here and everything down there, bad guys, right? Because the way it's set up, again, Copcading is in the low ground, all right? And then we were stationed at Upper Kamdesh was what we called it. So you have a bunch of Kalats leading all the way down to Copcading, right? So the militia was on the high ground, and he was like, dude, everything below us is bad dudes, right? So we link up with them, right? And then, of course, our headquarters element, they station themselves with the militia along with the commando element that came with us. And then my group, me and some other SF dudes, we took our platoon of commandos with our enablers, and we went to Upper Kamdesh, right? Upper Kamdesh is pretty much where majority of the fight took place. So we get in there, we strong point, and then sure enough, as soon as daybreak, like, they were right on top of us, just freaking 16 hours of just slinging lead. And the way this is set up is, like I said, Kalat. Like my Kalat was like right here, and we're shooting down at him. And then right below me was another Kalat. And what they did was they had cut holes into this mud hut, and they were sticking their AK-47 through those holes. and they were shooting at us from there. And the way our position was set up was it was like looking out of your like back patio, because it's not back patio, but like one of those fences that's like wide open on the very front, but the bottom is actually like mud, and then we had like a window to actually look down. So we didn't have that much cover, and then they did, because they're literally firing from a mud wall. So they would put their AKs in this hole and they would shoot at us. And it took us a while to figure out where it was coming from, because it was like really, really good effective fire, right? We had a couple of commandos get hit. So we're like, where's this fire coming from? And then once we identify, we're like, because we saw some dust and all of that, we're like, holy crap, like they're literally like right there. But we're taking it to them, but it's not effective because they're in a mud hut. So we had to do a couple of air-to-ground engagements, like literally right in front of us, just to collapse that building. And then it was just 16 hours of just more of the same. And eventually, so that first day, about 16 hours worth of fighting. And then, 20, let me look at the number here because I have it written down. So the first day, we did 16 hours of engagement and 48 EKIA for the first day. So, and that's day one. Day two, myself and my element, we cleared down to lower Kamdesh at this point. So we cleared through a couple of Kalats, and of course, there's just charred bodies everywhere from all the air-to-ground engagements, right? So we're still clearing all these houses to make sure that no one is hiding out in there. And then once we are done clearing, we go down to lower Kamdesh at this point, and then we had another element move into where we were, and we secured lower Kamdesh, which gave us a better vantage point on what was going on, because we also had a road that ran like right in front of where we were, because that's the road that they were using to conduct Kazovac. So as we're fighting with their dudes and we're laying waste to them, there's vehicles making rounds back and forth, grabbing their injured and their dead, and they're running them down the road to go get help. So it was, so we went in initially expecting to be there for 3 days. And 7 days later, we finally got replaced. And the entire 7 days, it was just back and forth with them, because as we kill and injure dudes, like they would just bring that truck and unload more dudes. And then this is just from my position. We had multiple positions on the high ground, just laying waste to them. And I'm talking about everything that we had between the Carl Gustav, the mortar systems, the 249s, the commandos had, M240s. It was just 7 days, just relentless fighting on those dudes' parts. Once it was said and done, in all 89 EKIA with no friendlies. We had a couple of injuries, but no friendlies dead at all. So it was an awesome operation, an awesome experience, mainly because of what took place in 2009 with Capcading. So being able to go in there, and it's funny because once Capcading fell and all coalition forces pulled out of that area, my ODA was the first one to set foot, as far as Americans go, back to that area since they left. So we actually had a chance to walk through Capcading and see some other stuff that was left behind. It was actually pretty cool.
Was there some Taliban stuff kind of hanging on walls, like their gear just left there?
Yeah. So as we were conducting clearing operation, once all the air to ground took place, like we would go down there and started walking down Katy. So what they did was they ravaged all the stuff that we left behind. So you could see the connexes just left open. Like they took whatever that they can get their hands on, and then they weren't necessarily using it as a base camp. We didn't see anything like that, but yeah, they were just grabbing whatever they can. Because again, the militia that was up there was still doing work and fighting with them since we left that area.
Got it. Got it. On that first day, you talk like a 16-hour gunfight. It's hard for anybody to imagine, I think, like the intensity of something like that. And I'm sure there are lulls and peaks. But during that time, are you mainly giving direction to the commandos? Or are you like kind of slinging lead at that point yourself?
No, so we're all slinging lead because we're stationary at this point. No one's really maneuvering. It's one of those things like we're taking cover, like we're running outside and we're shooting call G rounds down range where we think they're at, and they're shooting at us and we're taking cover, right? So everyone at this point knows exactly what they need to do, right? And the commandos, as soon as rounds break off, like they're trying to get some too, right? So everybody's just out to stack as many bodies as possible. Wow. So we're all just going after it, and then whenever there's a little break in the fighting, whether it's them reloading or we're like, okay, yeah, we think it's safe. We'll run outside, load a car G round, and send it, right? And then we'll come back in, take cover, and just keep shooting. So yeah, it was like that for the entire day. And then as we identified positions, we would call air support, right? Because we had some awesome CCTs, man. Those dudes are awesome, and I've always been a big fan of those dudes, man, just because they do some really good work. So the CCTs were spot on. Like we would identify a location, CCT with, because again, we had 2 CCTs on that one. We had one at our location, one at the other location. So he was getting his gun on too. So as soon as we identify something, he would call it up, and Apaches would just, because again, since it was such a high vis mission directed by the president, like we had all the air support that we can ask for.
By the end of 7 days with like day-long gunfights, I've got to assume you're not sleeping a ton at night. You're probably rotating shifts. Like, are you just smoked at the end of 7 days?
Yeah, so it was one of those things that the adrenaline just lasted 7 days, right? Once I got back to base camp, then I was like, oh man, I'm dehydrated. I'm hungry. Like I lost my toothbrush somewhere out here. Like it was like, okay, I need to, get myself together, right? But while we were out there running and gunning, like it was like there was no downtime. Well, there were downtime, but there was no, hey, I need to take a break, or I need to do this. It was just, hey, let's keep getting after it, because you figure, especially that type of scenario where we know where the enemy is, like it was just a free fall, and it was awesome. Like everybody was trying to get after it. It's like a SF guy's freaking wet dream. Like we're just out there like, hey, we know where the enemy is. We have all the air support that we could think of. Like if anything moves, like they're getting shot, right? Yeah. And it was awesome. It was the perfect revenge mission.
Yeah, and you had the high ground. I can't even imagine if they had infilled you into the existing HLZ in the valley floor. Like, forget that.
Yeah, we would have been fighting literally through them because they were already hunkered down waiting for something. So if they actually infilled us into capcading like they initially were planning to, then it would have been a disaster, Man.
One of the things I noticed in the prep for this, your Happy to Be Alive Day, which is surprisingly not the event in Iraq. It takes place in a place I know well in Ghazni. What happened there?
So fast forward to 2014. All right, we are running commandos. This time it's second Kandak out of Gardez, and we get tasked to go support a sister ODA that's getting ready to rip out of their area of operation, a first group team. So same concept with the commandos, similar setup to the 2012 rotation. We infill under the cover of darkness in this village, Nani village in Ghazni. I remember it because that's the day I almost lost my life. So we infill, and then like normal, we conduct clearing operations. We strong point, and then again, it happens like clockwork. We set up security, and then we just wait for the sun to come up. And then, of course, at night, we get everything set up. We because whenever we roll in the CH-47s, like they're so big and there's so much room. Like we always stick our ATVs, and our ATVs are always loaded down with literally everything that we have on the base camp. Like we bring everything. We bring the mortar systems, the 60 and the 81. We bring the 240s. Like we bring the Mark 19, like Mark 47. We bring everything, and then once we strong point and we have 150 commandos, so we can haul all that stuff around. So once we strong point at night, then we set everything up as far as the positions on top of the roofs, because we know once the sun comes up, they're going to attack us. But by that point, we have all our weapon systems set up, so it's it's an awesome fight. So in this particular one, we go through, we link up with first group, we clear the village, and then we strong point. We take turn pulling guard, and then the sun comes up, and we're waiting for it at that point, right? So we're waiting for it. We're waiting for it. We're like, man, like I guess we killed enough of them last night, or last night, to where like we've destroyed them. We crushed their spirit. They don't want to fight us anymore, right? So we're like, oh, okay, well that's fine. So we wait a little bit longer. Nothing at this point. It's noon. So everybody's just kind of hanging out. Like we've let our guard down a little bit. And I remember this vividly. Myself and my buddy Chris, freaking the guy that opened him, slapped the guy. We're on the rooftop with everyone else. Like at this point, we've we got the American flag up. Like we made we did like a makeshift flagpole. We got the American flag up. We got the a Texas flag up. Guys are taking pictures by the flags. So we're just having a good old time, right? Because night before it was an awesome fight. And then so I'm standing there speaking with my buddy Chris, and out of nowhere, like I hear it. Like it was like if I was just an inch over, like my entire face would have been blown off. Like it was literally like I just hear the rounds just like I was like, and then I see the impact, because we had a bunch of water cases that we had purchased off the local economy for us to drink throughout the day. So the rounds literally go in between him and I and hit the water bottles, right? And then we watched the water bottles explode. And then we also had a weapon system right next to us. Some of the rounds hit the weapon system and nicked my buddy in the shoulder. And then at this point, it was almost slow motion. Like we both just dive off the roof, right? And then we had some first groupers with us on the actual roof. Also, a couple of rounds hit one of their weapon systems and slide into their one of the guys' biceps. And then once that happened, it was just a full out firefight for hours on end. And then so yeah, we dove down. I got my freaking my helmet on, and then I got to my station, and then we just started fighting. That rotation, that specific fight, we lost a commando because he got hit in the leg and actually bled out. But and then of course the first group guy, like the round went through his scar heavy, was the weapon system that he had, and tore his bicep up. So we got him banded up, and then we just got into the fight, and everybody was getting after it. Yeah, it was till this day, like I remember the sound that those rounds made, because I've never been that close to rounds before. Like,
wow,
you got to be really close to hear them whiz by you. I was like, holy crap, just a few inches over, and literally my entire face would have been gone. And that's why I still revert back to what I said at the very beginning when I said, if it's your time to go, it's gonna be your time to go, regardless of where you're at. So yeah, that was my happy to be alive day.
I mean, even talking about you're talking about an op just a moment ago, 7 days of multi-hour gunfights, like obviously pretty incredible you make it through that, but this is so close that it's a little closer to home. Do you ever get the feeling, and maybe you dealt with this early on when you saw that psychiatrist or the psychologist, but at a moment like that, after the fighting's died down, is there anything in you where you're like, oh, I almost died. I've got a new lease on life. I need to really appreciate this? Or is it just, hey, it's another day. I'm in uniform. Could happen any day.
No, it was one of those things because even after that incident, it was just once the fight stopped, it was back to joking around like, oh, you son of a bitch. That's the easiest Purple Heart ever,
Yeah. I knew you were going to say that.
Machine gun shot you because the round's about stuff. Yeah, it was back to that. It was like, what, dude? We looked at his arm. We're like, man, that ain't no bullet hole. This is just ricochet from where the bullet hit the actual machine gun. So yeah, it was back to it being light and us just joking around with each other. And at no point in time did it ever dawned on us that, hey, like, we're lucky to be alive. Like, now, granted, being on this side of it now, I think about that all the time. But when we were in it, running and gunning, it was just more of, hey, man, like, yeah, let's take it to them, and then just making and just keeping everything light and just making the best out of all the situation that we found ourselves in.
Just out of curiosity, when you said you were raising the American flag, you also mentioned the Texas flag. Any reason the Texas flag was going up?
Man, we had this 18 Fox that's from Texas. Yeah, we had this 18 Fox. Josh, awesome dude. He always carried the both flags with him, the American flag and a Texas flag. And whenever we get a chance, we would throw him up. But yeah, he's a big Texas guy.
It's awesome. All right. Well, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, and man, I know you got more stories in there, and I feel bad we didn't get to even more of them. But I also want to be respectful of your time and spend just a moment on your initiative now. So you could have done anything, to your point, when you got out of the military. You kind of chose this path, the Chronicles path. Why is that? And where do you want this thing to go?
Again, man, like I've had an awesome career. Like the military is literally raised me, and I know what it's done for me. And I just want to do the best that I can to give, folks that same option, and even if it comes in the form of exposure, just letting folks know that, hey, here I am from Haiti with nothing, and the military is literally done everything for me, to include help me build generational wealth. You know what I mean? So there's no reason why I can't do the same for you. And it's also it gives you purpose. I know a lot of these younger guys nowadays, they don't really know what their purpose is, and it's like, well, why not try this? If it's not for you, whatever, at least you got some college money out of it, and then you can go do whatever you need to do. And then it also fills that void that I think we all feel once we leave the military, right? Because again, it's like 20 years of experience, 20 years of combat, right? Because we joined during the combat era, and it's like, okay, now that I'm out, how do I transfer that information? How do I mentor? How do I make sure the next generation don't repeat the same things that we did? And Green Beret Chronicles on YouTube has been my way of actually doing it. And it's filled that void, man. Like, I'm having a really good time.
I bet.
I hold mentoring sessions every day. Guys, get on the phone with me that are looking at joining, or that are currently in the pipeline as far as selection goes, and they get a chance to pick my mind, and I let them know everything that I got. And if they have questions that I can't answer, then I have access to some of my old team leaders, some of whom are lieutenant colonels at this point, some majors. Like, I have access to them that I can tap into to make sure that these guys get the information that they need. Because I'm a firm believer in, just the progression of things, right? We're entering into like the social media era. Like, we can expect these guys to seek out the information, to, go to libraries and try to find all this stuff. It's like, it's our job as veterans to show it to them, to let them know, hey, like, there's always a fight around the corner, and we've done our part. Now it's time for you to step to the plate and do yours. But as veterans, we're going to equip you with the right tools to make sure that it gets done right. Even that's in the form of sharing our experience through combat stories or through my
Mhm.
channel. Whatever I can do, man. I'm committed to making sure that the next generation is ready, so this country can stay at the top for as long as possible.
I like that you mentioned the purpose aspect. I think we all felt that when we were in uniform, and it's tough to figure it out outside of that construct. But do you have kind of this purpose that you keep in mind now that you've transitioned?
Yeah, yeah. Now that I'm out, my purpose is to make sure that the United States military stays the strongest military in the world, and even if and I'm gonna do my part to make sure that it stays that way, and even if it's in the form of getting on the phone with a 19-year-old trying to join, should if I can create two or three of me, then why not?
Yeah. Any any books that you advise some of these guys to go read as they're getting into the pipeline or to give them the mentality?
Yeah, so there's a good book out there called Winning with Winning in Mind. Is a pretty good book that's geared towards helping guys get their mental mindset where it needs to be for the journey that they're getting ready to embark on. So I always recommend that book to
Awesome.
whoever reaches out to me.
All right, perfect. Well, Jay, there's two questions I ask everybody before we get you out of here. One is there anything that you carried with you when you were downrange that had sentimental value, good luck charm, or just something that someone gave you that you wanted to have on you while you were out there?
I tell you what, man, I get so much shit for this, but this hat has been with me for the past 15 years. And it's been on every single deployment and on every single operation. And when I almost got shot in the face, this was the hat that I was wearing. So I consider it my good luck charm.
For people who are listening and can't see you, can you just describe the hat for them?
Yeah, so it's a Yankees hat that I had since 2010, and the way it works is once you get to your first team, you're considered a new guy, so you don't get any team equipment, right? You don't get the team hat, you don't get the team shirts, you don't get any of that. But everybody around you is wearing like cool hats, so like everybody goes to the range and to all these cool training exercises, and they're all wearing hats. So you're like, well, I guess I'll go get my own hat. So I went and I got my Yankees hat, of course, because I'm a Yankees fan from New York. So I went and I got this Yankees hat, and for the first 6 or 7 months or so, this was my team hat. So I wore it religiously. And then once I did get my team swag, my team hat and my shirts and all of that stuff, I wanted to preserve it so it didn't look like my Yankees hat all frayed out. So I didn't wear it as much, right? Because I wanted to wear it when I'm in the States because it's nice and fresh. When I go out, people can be like, oh, you're with that team. So I wore my Yankees hat downrange because that's what's going to get destroyed. And it's been through hell and back until till this day. It's falling apart, but it's still
Yeah, it's
it's
cool.
a conversation starter on YouTube for sure.
Yeah. And for people listening, it's camo. So don't worry. It's not like your standard
Yeah, yeah.
Yankees hat.
Bright red or something.
Yeah.
Uh,
um, and then the last question I ask everybody, Jay, like you look back, near death experiences, multiple, having gone 12 Bravo to the 18 Charlie route. Would you go back and do all that again?
I absolutely would. I absolutely would. I wouldn't change anything because I found myself thinking about it. Man, would I have done the 18 X-ray program if I had found out about it initially? But then I wouldn't have those experiences at the very beginning that kind of shaped my mindset as far as death and how to deal with it, right? Because having experienced that at the very beginning kind of shaped the rest of my career. So no, I actually wouldn't change anything. If I was able to go back and do it all over again, I would do
Yeah,
everything absolutely the same.
that's great. And then how can people find you, your new initiative? Where do they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on YouTube, guys. Green Beret Chronicles is the name of the channel. Same on Instagram, just Green Beret Chronicles. If you have any questions or you're thinking about going soft, or even if you're in the Army and you just need some mentorship from NCOs, it doesn't have to be soft related because I was a private. I used to do dumb stuff too. You know what I mean? So I know what it's like. So whatever I can do to help, anybody out, then I'm more than willing. So yeah, YouTube or Instagram, guys. I'll be more than happy to speak with you.
Thanks so much, Jay. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Anytime. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story. This was a fun one for sure with Jay. He sent me a lot of info to prepare, and he knows what it's like to be on air. You can just tell with the way that he interacts, the way he tells stories. It was so much fun, and there's a lot more there to unpack. I hope I do get a round two with him at some point, ideally in person. So just a couple listener comments this time. A couple 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast. One is from MotoMX710. It says, great podcast. This is just a great podcast. I enjoy all of these stories. And the second is from Cup of Joe O'Brien. It says, highly recommend. I can't highly recommend this show enough. I never deployed overseas at all, but I do enjoy the stories and the history that's shared. Regardless if you deployed or not, I highly recommend this podcast. I don't remember which episode it was, but the one with the chaplain, who was, I believe, in some SF unit, was one of my more recent favorites. Yeah, that's absolutely right. We had a chaplain on who was a former special operator, which is incredibly rare and something that helped him quite a bit to be a chaplain in the special operations community. At SOCOM, he ended up working for and advising 8 general officers. But he knew what it was like to be on a patrol away from your family. He knew what the challenge was like, and that just makes that chaplain such, in my opinion, I have to imagine, such a great confidant who can understand what you're going through. But yeah, thank you so much for leaving these comments. It means a ton. It keeps me going too, I have to be honest, to see that there's some impact here and that it resonates with y'all. Thank you so much for supporting us. Stay safe.